So, hello and welcome to the New Gig podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Hodgson. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by the CEO of TalentDesk, Xenios Thrasyvoulou. How are you doing, Xenios?
Doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, Xenios, could you just give us a little bit of a background on yourself and your journey, but also TalentDesk as well, why you started the platform and what you're doing at the moment and the problems that you're solving?
Sure. I mean, go all the way back to my birth date because it was 1st of May, which is Labor Day. So I guess I was destined to be serve the labor market at large, which I've been in since our first company, 2007, was the founding of that's PeoplePerHour.
Yeah.
That was the first sort of business I started in the labor space, and it was one of the early marketplaces for freelance services, connecting freelancers with mainly small businesses at the
Yeah.
time. And of course, the recession happened in 2008. There was a big sort of need for supplemental income, and unemployment went up, and people kind of looking for alternative sources of making money and surviving really. And PeoplePerHour became a very important resource and therefore a successful business off the back of that. And that was our entry into sort of freelancing, if you like. And
Yeah.
TalentDesk was born 10 years exactly into that journey, so 2017.
Yeah.
Out of conversations we had really with customers who are slightly at the larger end of the of that segment, if you will. And I heard many times repeatedly something that I didn't expect. I was kind of the guy with the sledgehammer trying to find a nail. And so what we heard was, look, finding freelancers is useful, etc. But actually, we have a bigger problem at hand, which is managing the ones we already have.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, the first couple of times you ignore it, you think it's kind of edge cases, etc. But when you hear it, a dozen times, if you got to start listening, otherwise you're asking the wrong question. And so, digging in to understand what that meant, I realized that companies that had slightly bigger headcount and tended to have more freelancers than typically a mom and pop shop, which is the market for PeoplePerHour and other marketplaces like PeoplePerHour that came afterwards, etc., tended to have a slightly bigger problem. Like, everything was a bit basically done on spreadsheets, like, tracking who the freelancers they worked with in the past, the rates that they had, any contracts that were signed, history of reviews and whatnot wasn't really being tracked, and allocation of work was done in disconnected ways, like a bit of email, a bit of phone, and sort of manual ways, etc. And then paying them was all disconnected as well when the time came to payment. Freelancers not necessarily always the most organized sort of functions. So they'll send an invoice, maybe there's no project description, someone gets it in accounts, doesn't know what work this is relevant to. Is it to be paid? Is it approved? Is it within budget? And all that stuff. So I quickly realized that at the larger end of businesses, and we're not even talking about enterprise grade companies, we're not talking necessarily a sort of FTSE 100, talking about companies that have a couple of dozen of regular freelancers or irregular contractors or irregular freelancers working for them. The whole process of doing it manually on email spreadsheets starts breaking down. And I mean, I thought, look, this is a real problem. I've heard it enough times. We know the space. We know software. We've been building software for 10 years. There seems to be an opportunity for an adjacent business, which is a software business that creates a SaaS platform, a software as a service, that solves this problem end to end. Whereby we provide this software solution to our customers, who then don't have to do all of these things that I described earlier on spreadsheets and
Yeah.
worry about the ball being dropped. It's just all tracked in one place from the beginning till the end, from the onboarding to the work allocation, the work tracking, budgeting. Of course, we've added a lot of features down the road, like automated time tracking,
Right.
tasks at the very granular level, and a lot of collaboration tools, in-app messaging, and all these things that come later on. But really, the essence of the idea, its origin, was substituting spreadsheets and manual processes, which, if you think about it, every SaaS business kind of did at the very beginning. So, CRM substituted managing your pipeline on a spreadsheet, which actually we did as well when we started, before we went into things like HubSpot, ticketing systems like a Zendesk, etc. Again, they do what you would do in an inbox environment when you only get 10 emails a day from.
Yes.
But then it breaks down when you're starting to get volume and you need something more dedicated. And that's what TalentDesk is created to solve.
Excellent. Well, and it really is something that's necessary, given that sort of the whole market is growing. And I think, as you said there, the fact it's not sort of startups, SMEs, it's larger corporations who are trying to be able to manage their open talent, their freelancer community, and make sure that they're brought in and it's as efficient as possible. Because we seem to be sort of in this development at the stage as well, that the future of work really is evolving and at an increasing pace, thanks to digitalization and the changes in the market conditions as well, Xenios.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when there's a trend, I think you look back and you think retrospectively that you got lucky that some catalyst happened. But actually, if you back the right macro trend, there will be something that will be a catalyst, because it's just the law of gravity, if you're backing the right trend. So when we started PeoplePerHour, people thought it was kind of luck that then the recession happened. People sort of became in need of supplemental income and so on. But actually, the trend was cycle agnostic, right? The trend of people wanting to go independent. I was agnostic.
Definitely.
And with Talent, of course, there were other tailwinds along the journey, such as COVID and the move to remote working, etc. But even if it wasn't for that, something else would have happened to accelerate it. And so as that trend grows, new challenges come into play. So, for example, compliance becomes a bigger issue, and so then you need to think about solving for that, which wasn't really part of the mix as much when you started, because it wasn't. But then it gets big enough, and then people start looking into, okay, how do we add another layer of security into this thing, etc. So like any entrepreneurial story, you have to kind of to back a trend, hope for some tailwind luck, in retrospect, seemingly luck, and also and solve new problems as you evolve.
And it really is a trend, because more people are demanding flexibility and choice and more decision making over when, where, and how they work. So this sort of freelance, open talent, whatever you want to call it, working on a project basis to individuals, organizations, and corporations is growing. But at the same time, we've got this kind of sort of counter wave in the fact that sort of governments and policymakers want to push people down the traditional 9-to-5 route and view everything as traditional employment and this sort of employment status, even though the talent itself is demanding something different. It's kind of the rule makers are saying that everyone should have a 1950s view of the labor market and everyone should be employed. We seem to be going in the wrong direction in some things, don't we, Xenios?
Yeah, sure, I agree that the government they're trying to impose that. I think it's like any kind of innovation, right? The systems that you're battling were designed decades before, solving in a different era, and they're no longer applicable. But you have to somehow wade your way through them, right? So the definitions of what is employment, what is part-time is a bit clearer, but self-employment, etc., were designed when the world worked in a very different way, when people would physically clock in and out with a card in an office, 9 to 5, and you'd clock out. And, you had the concept of a consultant who didn't have to come to the office, and so on and so forth. But that is all merging, because maybe some companies still clock in and out. And so I think if you were to kind of redesign the system today, that's always a good litmus test. You would design it very differently. You would define what employment is very differently to what it was back in whenever. I think the last time in the UK, I can speak a bit, in the UK, last time the labor laws were actually fundamentally changed was in 1972 or something like that.
Wow, yeah.
The world was fundamentally different in 1972. I don't think we even had email. And so, you're having to live with these laws purely because it's very difficult for the system to change. But with regards to the government and their incentive, and then you've got the problem of misaligned incentives, which is what I was going to get to. So the government incentive, I mean, I would be inclined to think that they don't really care whether you're an employee or a contractor. They care about the tax collection, which is fair enough, right? That is what that is the source of income. That is what keeps an economy afloat. I get it, but their incentive is to collect tax, and it simply just so happens that collecting tax from companies where everyone is an employee is just a lot easier.
Right.
It's just a lot easier because you do your deductions at source, and you have one payroll log, and it's all kind of very clean and simple. When you've got a mix of employees and contractors who file their own taxes, if everyone has their own taxes, there's just a lot more administration to be done. So it's just a lot harder. But and then you come to this point that, okay, well, so then you're trying to solve a tax collection problem with an employment status question.
Yes.
Where the two should be quite independent. Right. So it's a means to an end. It's not itself what people really care about. Put differently, I think in a world, if you just, as a thought experiment, if you could collect taxes as easily and efficiently, whether you're regardless of your employment status, then really the government's out of the question. They're happy. So then the question is, okay, it falls back to the worker, as I think it should, because they're the ones that actually do the work, as to what they would like to be and whether there's a fit with the company. And so if you rate freedom, as a lot of people do today, more than some of the benefits that come with employment, you opt for that. And you find a company there's a good fit with that sort of design, or if you rate sort of security that comes with employment in some jurisdictions, don't forget, right? Because like the US, still the largest economy in the world, it isn't really the case. Like you're employed at will. The security that comes with that, other than health benefits, isn't that much more. And the benefits question is an economics question. You could solve it, right? You could even say that there's no if an employer is willing to give you a benefits package, it's just about paying extra for it if they want. So actually, we're bundling too many things into one question of status, right? Of employment status. Like there's what you earn, which should be completely independent, and the benefits around that. That should not really be determined by the nature of the contractual relationship. You could earn more as a contractor, you could earn less with the benefits. If an employer says, I'll pay you 30% extra to cover for insurance or whatever else that you would get under employment, you're actually better off. So do you see what I mean? Like they should really be decoupled. That's the economics question of what you earn. There's the contractual nature, which it's a trade-off between certain things, freedom being a key one. And then there's the government thing, which is kind of like, okay, making sure that they don't lose taxes. Taxes.
I guess the issue at the moment is we're kind of battling with these legacy systems, but also the legacy mindsets, which sort of maybe hampers some of the progress, some of the evolution that we should be looking for in the sector, because to meet up with the reality of what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, the more we're stuck in the old system, it's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It's just never going to fit. I think, but it's a problem because it's just, if the government around approach this with a fresh mindset, you would almost start with a clean slate and say, okay, in today's world, where the boundary between full-time employment, traditional employment, and contracting is blurred because employees work remotely, there's very little differences that you can actually put your finger to.
Yeah.
The two, in terms of the substance of the work, which is really what matters, it really is converging. So if you were to design for the current way the world works and continue working and only become more blurred, I think you'd put a system in place which doesn't live in the past, and you'd say, okay, well, let's just think about it as a thought experiment, right?
Yeah.
If you could, as I think happens in some jurisdictions, if you could submit your income over whatever period of time online in a government portal, whether you're a contractor or an employee, and your tax is calculated and you just pay your tax, you should really be paying the same amount of tax. That's another thing. You should really be paying the same amount of tax. The tax that you pay should be based on your income.
Yes.
Why should it matter? Why should you be taxed differently if you're an employer or not? You do the same work for the company,
Exactly.
the same person.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So in a world where you solve that by say, you know what, in a digital world, again, this was all designed way back, if you could just digitally submit your income tax and as you do, and you could say it's an element of trust, but if you don't, it's the same currently. If you fake your tax submission, you go to prison. It's a criminal offense. So that's the deterrent. So if you go and submit it, and then that automatically becomes a very clean system for tax collection, then that's solved for without regard to your employment status, which actually makes sense, because if you're making X thousand a year and you're paying tax based on that, and if you're a corporation, it's different, fine, because you might have employees' expenses, etc. But for that becomes a bit clear and cut. When you start becoming a company, that blurriness goes away a little bit. But the shade of gray is you're acting as an individual, and there's this gray area of am I an employee, am I a contractor?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you were able to submit your taxes nice and clean in digital world, then the government no longer cares, right? So that's out of the question.
Yeah, they get the
and
money.
So then the next question is, okay, you as an employee, what would you prefer? And as I said before, I think there would be a subset in there that would prefer to be employees take, but even that distinction, I think, will break down over the future, because as employers evolve to say, well, look, we will offer you the same benefits whether you're a contractor or an employee, because actually, why does it matter? I mean, I would argue that there are contractors working in companies that are as crucial to the company as employees. That doesn't change it. Even if you're doing 4 days a week, why does that person may actually be doing 4 days of more critical work for the company? So why do you matter less to the company?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't. You matter equally. Every hour of work done, whether it's under this contract or another contractual arrangement, is actually the same to a company, right?
Yeah.
And so that boundary will also get blurred, because once you take the tax equation out, it comes down to things like trade-off of freedom and benefits. And like we, for example, give the same freedom to everyone. Everyone can work remotely. We have full-time employees who said to us, we're going to work from a different country for 2 months because we want to travel, and so on. So those are benefits that traditionally you would only be able to enjoy as a contractor, but now you can as an employee.
Right. So
then you're eliminating it down to one variable, which is really this trade-off of benefits and security, which changes jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Right. Yeah.
It's a commercial question for a company to say, well, I will provide you that security regardless. There's nothing stopping a company, once you get rid of this risk that the government will start knocking on your door, there is nothing stopping a government saying to you, I will offer you the same maternity benefits. The problem now, and this is why it's a catch-22. The problem now is that if you go and do that now to a contractor, that will look like employment, and then you get in trouble.
Yeah, this is well, we've seen this in so many geographies. I mean, the whole idea of sort of AOR, EOR, and the fact that, you know, if you're seen as an employee or an employer, and it's becoming so expensive, all these services as well these days, it's really making it very, very difficult for companies and organizations who want to take on open talent. There's this kind of minefield and this worry in the back of the mind that they're doing things wrongly or misclassifying.
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22. It's a vicious cycle. Like the fact that there's a government risk because of the tax collection problem means that then you as an employer cannot offer what you would otherwise have offered contractors who choose to be independent and not be bothered about offering it because you've got the affordability to do it, and you would do it because you value those people. But now you've got the problem that by doing it, you end up in a classification question, which, like I said earlier, only is relevant to tax collection. So but that's because you've got this square peg in a round hole problem that we have. You're trying to collect taxes based on an old system that hasn't evolved with the new digital age and how people work today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's individuals who lose out as well, Xenios, because, you know, a lot of organizations would like to give these benefits, as you say, would like to give things, but they're scared to death of doing it in case they're sort of caught in this old system that's going to penalize them for it.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a crazy situation we've got in ourselves into like that. But I mean, how do you see things evolving? Because, you know, the technology's there, a lot of the tools and the services are there to make this easier. Is it a case that we need these root and branch changes in the approach to taxation and the collection of it that will allow us to move forward and iron out some of the problems that we still see today?
I mean, there are two questions. Unfortunately, the answer is different. Like, is it what should be done ideally, or what can be done? Like, I think what should be done is what I addressed before. I think, and other than the bureaucracy and red tape, it's not that difficult. Like, for example, when COVID happened, in a matter of record weeks, which was actually quite refreshing to see, the government had set up a portal for furloughing and so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah.
So when you're kind of in a bit of a pickle and you have to act fast, you kind of do.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that if you wanted to really solve the tax collection problem and do it digitally, right, for the majority of the population, maybe there's some age population that still don't have internet or whatever, but that's not even going to be a problem going forward in the future.
Yeah.
Right? You could just completely reinvent how taxes are collected so that you don't have this problem of sort of this duality. Are you a contractor? Are you? And if, you know, and the collection is different, and therefore it becomes material whether you're classified here or there because the collection differs. So if I were to kind of, you know, answering the first leg of the question, what should happen? I think there should be a reinvention of the taxman's method. You know, and it's not that difficult. Like I said, you could set up a portal. You could say, for example, like you do in some jurisdictions, you submit your income, you write a check to the government, and that's the end of it. Or you could even sort of stick to some of withholdings, sort of the company. You know, there is no reason why, if you're a contractor and you're getting paid the exact same amount as an employee, there's no reason why the company withholds your taxes on behalf of the government at source as an employee, but doesn't do it as a contractor. So, but you see why this thing was designed way before the digital age. It was designed when contracting was actually kind of a minority, small thing.
Right.
Employees turned up at work. The distinction was very clear. Now it's not. It's getting blurred. So I think the first problem to solve is solve the tax collection. Converge the two. Like if you're earning £50,000 a year as an employer or a contractor, it shouldn't matter. You've got a bit of the national insurance contributions thing sort of to think about, but again, that's not a big that's not that difficult, right? It's just a matter of saying, you can choose to pay that as a contractor or not. It's an economics question, but the collection needs to be solved first so that the government isn't that fussed as to whether you're classified as an employee, as a contractor, because that contractual arrangement should only be between the two people that are in the contract,
right?
That are contracting, which is the employer and the worker, whether employee or contractor. That it's a contract between those two people. Those should be the only two people concerned, by definition.
Yeah.
As to what the nature of that contract is, with the trade-offs that we've discussed. And then there isn't a risk. So the government is no longer at risk because you've solved the tax collection problem. You've solved for that. And so it just becomes a purely commercial discussion between two parties, which is what it ought to be. I say to you, I only want to work at X number of hours. I want to be free. I don't need the benefits, or I also want the benefits and I'm, of a caliber that I can demand it, and so on and so forth. And it becomes a commercial discussion between you and I to say, okay, well, we can offer you X.
Yeah.
Now, how long? Now, so to the second level, because will this happen? I don't know. It may take us 100 years. We may need another catalyst, Glenn. Catalysts help change because you are forced. You might need another, God forbid, let's hope it's not a pandemic, but you might need some tectonic shift again to happen.
Yeah.
And you don't know what that's going to be. Like, there might be some lawsuit with a company that's too big to fail. And then what does the government do? Does it bring them down and have the problem of dragging the economy in a recession if it's another Lehman situation because they're stuck in the historic regulation? Then it becomes a contentious debate. If there was a massive, let's take one of the top FTSE 100 companies, if there was a massive multi-billion classification claim, and the government had this trade-off, do I shut down someone like an HSBC and hundreds of thousands of jobs are lost, or do I change? Maybe it's going to require something very big like that to happen.
Yes. Yeah. Necessity is often the mother of invention in most cases. So even though it's, we shouldn't be wishing for these things, sometimes it takes that, a seismic shift to move things forward. But will you say that regardless, the future is looking bright, Xenios? I mean, we've got, technology is accepted, and also mindsets seem to be changing to accept the possibilities and look at the opportunities that technology is bringing for the labor market and beyond.
Yeah, look, I think there's no question that technology is improving both the work environment, the productivity of people. It's what saves the day every time. There's a productivity which is empowered by technological change, the ability to produce more output per unit, per human hour. And that's happened along the way every time there was any kind of improvement in technology. We were more productive with computers than without. We were more productive with the internet than without. We will be more productive with AI, despite all the question marks around it, than without, because it's just an added enhancement to your intelligence. And that productivity gain drives prices down in the economy, which makes products that, the first computers cost hundreds of thousands of pounds because of productivity. Now everyone has a computer and more than one. I have no question that it's proven economics in so many ways that technology drives productivity. Productivity drives macroeconomic long-term growth, drives prices down, and ad infinitum, if we get infinitely more productive, the price of everything drops to zero, right? Per economic theory. So because it's just infinitely productive to produce everything. But we have the luxury of a lot of things at our hands that even a generation ago were huge luxuries, like even mobile phone or computers and so on and so forth. So this is just going to be another thing. So that, you know, I don't have any question that we will be more productive at work because of not only this shift, but the ecosystem that is created around it. You know, from software like Slack, the 9 to 5 check-in before used to be a card at a door and a
Yes.
checkout. I remember my first job, I was literally check in, check out. Now it's when you log into a Slack or Teams or whatever your company uses.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when you log into your team environment. So,
Mm.
so the future of work is not necessarily just about this employee-employer relationship, contractor, etc. It's also all of the tools that have been created and keep being created to make the work that we conduct more productive. Better comms, more instant comms. Possibly email will get obsolete. It was a game changer when it came out because it's how much more productive is it than sending traditional mail. Now instant messaging is taking over. We may look one day back at email and think that it was a joke. Why would you even use email, right? I think that would plausibly happen. And then the next thing you start using is just an improvement.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the software generation around empowering, you no longer need to be, I still remember the first time we were doing sprint in tech, it was 2 week sprints, etc. Kind of revealing my age on in tech space, but the original thesis, if you read about it, agile development, is post-its on a wall, like very visual, and the team gathers in front of a wall, and you have these sort of notes of like the pro, and then they move across as they get developed, etc. And that was the whole thing. Like you have this whiteboard with your sprint planning. And you have to be physically there. Of course, now you can do it in so many different, software environments and do it more productively. And
the access there and the technology there. And I absolutely agree with you. I think the efficiency gains from an organizational perspective, but also from an individual perspective, are there and should be harnessed. And let's hope that this happens, because there is too often the tendency for particularly decision makers and regulators to kind of fear what they don't understand and put artificial blockages and barriers in place, which doesn't bring things forward. Quite the opposite, sort of really reduces the impact and the potential for growth and development.
Yeah, unfortunately, that won't change anytime soon. I think, whilst I'm an eternal optimist, and a lot of what I've said is, I think, to look into a brighter future, I also am a pragmatist, and I acknowledge that the people putting barriers because of being stuck in old systems, because of protecting interests, because of bureaucracy and red tape and so on, that's not going to change. So I think it will be a constant battle, like it is in every industry. That needs to be deregulated and modernized, and you will always have the battle between the few who drive or want to drive change and the many who don't. I don't think that's going to change. It's in a way, it's just human nature. So until the end of mankind, I think it's not going to change. You will always have, but I mean, maybe imagine if everyone around you want to change all the time. That also could be a very dangerous world to live in. But what are the catalysts that drive these tectonic changes and change? I don't know. Great leadership. We need forward-thinking people who kind of decide to kind of make it happen.
Well, we need all those things, Xenios, and I think important to shine a light on the reality of these things, but also keep fighting the good fight. It's been a pleasure to have you on this episode, explaining some of the thoughts, some of the challenges that we have at the moment, and really want to check back in to see the development and the great work that TalentDesk's doing as well. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.